Hi, this is Brad Linder with Liliputing, and I wanted to do a short video review of the Samsung Galaxy Player. This is the Samsung Galaxy Player 5.0, which means that it has a 5-inch display. There's also a 4-inch model, and this is in comparison with, say, a Google Nexus 1 smartphone with a 3.7-inch screen, an iPod Touch with 3.5-inch screen, or a Amazon Kindle Fire with a 7-inch display. And what that means is basically it's going to fit into the palm of your hand. The 4-inch model is going to fit a little bit easier and also be a fairly pocketable device. It's a lot like a phone, except it doesn't make phone calls unless you're making calls over Wi-Fi with Skype or another voice over IP application. It's probably one of the closest things you're going to find to an iPod Touch with the Android operating system instead of Apple's operating system. As you can see, there's a pretty big size difference here. Even though the iPod Touch has a 960 by 640 pixel display, this has an 800 by 480 pixel display, so the screen is not quite as sharp on the Samsung. But in terms of everyday use for surfing the web, playing games, reading ebooks and other activities, the experience is really not that dissimilar. The main difference is that you've got a different operating system here on the Samsung model. You're running Google Android. So if for some reason you're not interested in an iPod Touch or another Apple product, you might want to consider this. It also has a couple of advantages that, besides the operating system, if you prefer Android to the iPhone operating system, you also get a micro SD card slot for expansion. So like the iPod Touch, it has about 8 gigabytes of storage, but you can expand that with an extra 32 gigabytes or any increment. It also has a built-in microphone, headphone jack, micro USB port. It's a more standard port than the proprietary port on the iPod Touch. Like the iPod Touch, or like the latest iPod Touch, there's a front-facing camera and a rear camera. But this has stereo speakers and flash and autofocus on the rear camera, which are things that you're not going to find on the iPod Touch. Now that said, this costs a little bit more than an iPod Touch. The 8 gigabyte version of the iPod is $199. This starts at $229 for the 4-inch model, $269 for the 5-inch model, and I don't believe it's available with 16 gigs or 32 gigs of storage. So you've got 8 gigs, and then you can expand with the micro SD card slot. In terms of specifications, it's got a 1 gigahertz Samsung Hummingbird single-core processor. It has, I'm actually not 100% certain how much RAM it has. We've talked about the storage. In terms of overall performance, though, it's pretty smooth. It feels a lot like using a top-of-the-line phone from, say, a year ago, or 2 years ago, sort of like the Google Nexus 1. I found that in terms of benchmarks, the two devices are very similar in terms of overall performance. The web browser is a little bit faster on the Nexus 1, but most applications seem to do perform pretty much the same on both devices, and that's a good thing. I find that the Nexus 1 is a little bit easier to hold because you can sort of grip your hand around it and reach your thumb from one end to the other. It's kind of hard to reach your thumb all the way across a 5-inch display, but my guess is that if you have a 4-inch model instead, that's not going to be as much of a problem. One thing that really sets this apart, besides the fact that it has better hardware than most sort of Android iPod Touch alternatives, is that it has the Google Android market. So we're running the Android 2.3 operating system, which was really designed for phones, but because Samsung has gotten approval from Google to include the Android market, you can install hundreds of thousands of applications, whereas something like the Amazon Kindle Fire ships with the Amazon App Store instead, which has around 20,000 applications. So if you really want the access to the full Android market, getting something like the Samsung Galaxy Player might be a better alternative. You can hack the Kindle Fire and some other tablets in order to include unofficial versions of the Android market, but this comes with it out of the box, no hacking required. Other optimizations include, and let me just do something real quick here to get rid of my email address. Other optimizations include the TouchWiz software, which, among other things, gives you this toolbar atop the notification screen for accessing Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, GPS, sound, and auto rotation toggles. You can also get to more advanced settings by going into the settings menu. The home screen is a little bit different from the standard Android home screen in the application launcher as well, and you can change out the apps in the dock here by grabbing, well, I didn't do that quite right. Let's remove that from there. by dragging something into the dock. Actually, you know what? I think we need to hit the edit view. There we go. And now we can drag into the dock and rearrange the dock if we want to. So overall, the user experience is pretty good. The camera application also has a couple of optimizations. So for instance, we can do panorama mode or action shots, adjust the flash or the exposure, and some other settings. For some reason I have camera on here twice. What else did I want to show you? It includes, in addition to the Android market, the Samsung App Store. There's really almost no reason to use it unless you want to give money to Samsung. We've got the Gallery application, Gmail application, Google Maps. The Netflix application works pretty nicely. Oh, right. So one last thing that I really wanted to make sure I showed you is, even though in a lot of ways I think that the Galaxy Player is one of the best Android alternatives to the iPod Touch, there are a couple of things that aren't great about it. And that includes these capacitive touchscreen buttons below the display. We've got menu, home, and back buttons, and as you can see, they're kind of hard to see, even in a fairly brightly lit room, but especially in a dimly lit room, unless you tap the display, in which case they glow very brightly. And so if you know where they are in a dimly lit room, it's not too hard to find the home button, but otherwise you might have to tap the screen to see them in order to go home, menu, back. And when you're reading a book, I find, let's go ahead and pull up the Kindle application here. It can be kind of disconcerting that you're reading, and every time you tap the screen to change pages, okay, we're logged out there, the buttons light up, so it sort of takes away from the immersive experience. Likewise, when you're watching a movie on Netflix, I noticed that the buttons are lit up the entire time that you're watching the video, and that can be a little bit distracting. So, you know, not a perfect device, definitely not the fastest device, doesn't have the fastest web browser, and those capacitive buttons, I have no idea why they're as bright as they are, why they light up as frequently as they do, or why they're as dim as they are when they're not lit. But overall, if you're looking for sort of the Android equivalent of an iPod Touch, the Galaxy Player is not a bad device. The 5.0 model has a 25 milliamp hour battery, 2500 milliamp hour battery. The 4-inch model has a 1200 milliamp hour battery. So if you really want the extra battery life, the 5-inch is the way to go. But because of the fact that it's kind of hard to reach your thumb across the screen, and the screen resolution is the same on both, if you don't need that extra battery life, I might seriously consider saving $40 and getting the smaller model. In terms of battery life, I've noticed that around 8 hours seems pretty good. If you're doing activities with the screen on, you should be able to get days of battery life if the screen is off. So if you're just listening to music or performing activities that don't require the display to be on, you should get a really, really long battery life here. And I've noticed that if I leave it unplugged for a couple of days at a time without charging, the battery does go down, but it doesn't disappear completely. That's a problem that I've seen affecting a lot of really cheap Android tablets, but power management overall seems to be pretty good on this. So overall, it's the Samsung Galaxy Player 5.0. It's a good tablet, might be a little bit overpriced considering you can actually get a Kindle Fire for less, but it has a micro SD card slot, it has a camera, has a microphone, has the complete Google Android market. Those are features that you don't necessarily get on the Kindle Fire. This is Brad Linder for Liliputing.